Hello, good morning, Mr. Thomas Meitzzinger. How are you? Very nice to meet you here.
How are you?
We are pleased and honored by your accepting our invitation to conduct this interview today. First of all, let me introduce yourself to our fans in Iraq and the MENA region. Dr. Thomas Meitzzinger is a German philosopher and a professor of theoretical philosophy at the University of Johannes Gutenberg at Mainz. This interview is done by Klekkamsh Nebeel for the Iraq Translation Project. The Iraq Translation Project is a non-governmental, non-profit, voluntary organization whose aim is to enrich the online art content and to connect the art culture to the latest breakthroughs, scientific and cultural, that are taking place worldwide. Nice to meet you again, Dr. Meitzzinger.
My pleasure.
Okay. First of all, we want to discuss the issue of our brain's function. Some scholars feel that or feel astonished about the functions of our brains and sometimes compare them to quantum computers. What do you think of this?
Oh, the quantum effects play no role in the human brain, because the human brain has a temperature of 37 degrees, and at 37 degrees and in these orders of magnitudes, quantum effects just mean themselves out. I don't know what these people mean, but I have been in consciousness research for a long time, and there's also always a subculture. When I came to America a long time ago, there was a word I had to learn, a new word, and it was the word of a quantum wacko. And I still don't know what a wacko is, but in consciousness research, there's always a certain group of people who think there are two big mysteries. One really big mystery is consciousness, and another big mystery is quantum physics. Logical conclusion, the two must have something to do with each other. But I think that just doesn't follow. But what we know is, of everything in the universe, the human brain is the most complex object. The internal structure. It's the most complex object we know.
Skip to the other question. Some neurological experiments can determine our choices before we are aware of them. So does this negate the free will, in your opinion?
Free will is a very difficult and complicated question. One cannot solve it in a short interview like this. Of course, there are many new empirical findings that are highly relevant. So, which show that when we have the conscious experience of making a decision, there of course have been many unconscious precursors to this event. Many other things have happened in the brain before, sometimes many seconds. But this does not mean, in my view, that the person as a whole is not free. That's a different question. Brains do not have free will. Persons have free will or do not have free will. And I think we have to get away from this question of yes or no, black or white, but think in terms of autonomy, degrees of autonomy. So in the human brain, I think the laws of physics hold. There is no magic going on in the human brain, but even a determined physical system can have degrees of autonomy. a determined system can be more or less free. It can have more or less self-control. And I think human beings have a very high level of self-control and autonomy, more than most animals. But if one wants to get deeper into this philosophically, of course one has to ask, what does free mean? And what does will mean? So if you look in the brain for a will, you don't find one. There's only the conscious experience of willing something. And I think we can explain that scientifically. We can explain the kind of conscious experience of willing something. And what is free is also not so clear. Many people think either you are determined, like a machine or an automata, or you are free. But freedom is not random choice. Freedom is, we don't want either determination or random events. We want something in the middle, namely rational self-determination. A human being becomes free if it can determine its own behavior according to reasons and evidence.
Depends on the context, and I think we are talking about something that are determined, that like we are going to die, and other things are not determined and we can choose. So it depends on the issue we are discussing.
Yes, but it is very important and interesting to do more research on it, because we want to increase our autonomy. That's what we want. So we have to understand the conditions that make us more or less autonomous. So, for instance, if you start injecting heroin, you very quickly lose autonomy. And there's a certain mechanism in the brain, the addiction mechanism, that makes you lose freedom. And the question is, are there also other mechanisms that will give me more autonomy, more freedom? And I think rational argument is a very good one.
Okay, I do agree with that. So, for the third question, what's the source of consciousness or awareness? Is it scientifically settled or proven?
No, we do not have a theory of consciousness. We do not know what consciousness is. But in the last 30 years, there has been a lot of progress. Maybe you know that I am one of the people who founded the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness 22 years ago. There are some 600 really good scientists and philosophers working on the problem for a quarter century now. And there is real progress. We understand many different aspects of the problem, but still nobody knows what it is. We do not have a theory.
Okay, because it isn't a materialist thing that we can find it and look at it exactly. It's only theory. It isn't yet found.
Yes, most researchers think that conscious experience is something that is based on information processing in the brain. So in dreaming at night, you have a very different kind of consciousness experience. And in dreamless deep sleep, you have a no conscious experience. And if you go into surgery in a hospital and you get a general anesthetic in your arm, also what is switched off is consciousness. So for many people, an obvious conclusion is that it has a necessary physical base, right?
Expanding liberal religious movements in the Middle East, especially in Iraq, Syria, and Egypt, and many of those young people are driving their strength from the achievements of the Western civilization and over the last 200 years. So this also applies to philosophy to some extent, and we can obviously notice many young people in these countries now following and appreciating the works and writings of the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. So do you think that writings of Nietzsche is the solution for what he once called the modern civilization crisis or stalemate in the West? Especially, he criticized that too much in his writings.
Well, we would have to do 10 interviews now. And I also would like to interview you now, because I would very much like to know more about the liberal movements of young people in the Arabic world. I would very much like to know more about it. As a philosopher, I'm working in the Giordano Bruno's Foundation in Germany, which is a foundation that works for secular humanism, tries to push back the influence of the church, which is still not as strong as in your countries, but is still quite strong in Germany. I think Nietzsche is not at all a good choice for many reasons. We would need 10 interviews, but I think Nietzsche is very intoxicating to read. It's fantastic reading Nietzsche. It's inspiring. It gives you a lot of ideas. But he has also played a very dangerous role in German history, of course, by saying certain things about the Jews that would probably take too long to go into in this interview. But in a certain way, we share this experience, you know. Germany had to start in 1945 when there was complete devastation. And there were also many young people in Germany who were very shocked, but they didn't want to think about the past because they knew their life is starting now. And they want to have their own life under these difficult conditions and are looking for orientation. So I think from a German perspective, we have an understanding how it feels. If you are young and you want to have your own life, but you are in a very, very difficult situation because many things have been destroyed. For instance, in Germany, we had the problem that after the war, many of the old Nazis were still in the government. You know, it was not over when it was over. I think what people in the Arabic world should rather do is study modern cognitive science and philosophy of mind. There's a lot there, accessible books, but there are also very good podcasts, like the Sam Harris podcast, for instance, that are free. And then, I mean, they only talk mostly about the situation in America, but there's a lot of secular discussion there, and it's very inspiring. But the short answer is, it is good if young people look for orientation in the West, but really, you have to create your own tradition. You know, you are neither East nor West, nor this nor that. You are yourself. And in the end, you have to be yourself and find your own solution, you know.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
You must be informed about Western science and what is going on, but you know, say maybe, I don't know if it's right, but a secular Muslim culture will be different from the solution in China or the solution young people find in Europe. You have your own conditions and you have to do your own thing.
Exactly. Yeah, context is different. Yeah.
Yes.
So, do you think individualism is important for the development that had take place in Europe, or it is actually a product or outcome of this development? I mean, is it a result or a cause?
okay, the most radical experiment in individualism has been America.
Yeah.
And the American experiment has failed. You know, there is Trump, there is an epidemic of drugs, there is torture, and people like torture, there is death penalty in some places. America is a danger for the rest of humanity in many ways, you know, and people, civilians shoot each other in the streets every single day. So we know that radical individualism doesn't work. We have also seen the fall of the Soviet Empire. So we have seen that radical communism also doesn't work. And I think the problem to be solved in this modern world is to have as much individual freedom as possible for the individual, but still have social cohesion. And it's a difficult problem because it's the same problem in the brain and the same problem in computers. The answer is not holism, and the answer is also not modularism. The answer is the right combination of holism and modularism. And I think that the problem in the Middle East is that the holistic, the integrated component is generated by religion, which causes a lot of problems. And the big question is, many people, for instance, in Europe ask this question, can we also live together in a holistic, wholesome way, in an integrated way, without having the integration done by religion and the church and the religious tradition? Can we create that ourselves? The idea is very good, but to do it in practice doesn't work. I will give you an example from Germany. So in Germany, we've had many Muslims coming in, you know, and there are many different people from other countries. Other European countries don't want them at all. Poland doesn't want them, Hungary doesn't want them, Austria doesn't want them, Czechia doesn't want them. So we've let them in, and we said, okay, everybody can be free here. There's freedom of religion, as long as they obey the laws. And then we have not looked after foreigners anymore. And now we have a situation where there are many parallel societies. So for instance, in Germany, many Turks or Muslims, they found their own society. And I mean, they want the money from Germany and the job, but they're not interested in the whole society. But there are also very conservative Germans in East Germany, Nazis, who form their own subculture. So the problem we have is that we are not as individual as America, but we've tried to give freedom to everybody, and then we didn't look what happens. And now we have many little parallel societies that don't talk to each other anymore. That is also not good. So I don't know what the solution to the problem is, but I think a society needs to find something that creates the social cohesion, the unity, that is not based on religion. That is the big challenge. Can we do that?
That's a big question. So do you think nationalism is good, or it's another problem to replace religion with nationalism?
Oh, nationalism is not the answer. Nationalism leads to war. I mean, history has shown that. Then it's a biological principle. It's like thinking of your own tribe, tribalism, and then you have to fight with other tribes. With religion, it's a little different, but if you unify by religion, you get a problem with the other religions, right? That believe other things. And what we see on Earth right now is a very difficult situation. We had many years of globalization, and it looked like the world is coming together more and more. And now those people who were not the winners of globalization, say some rich people in America, but who are the losers of globalization, say people in East Germany or Trump voters in the country, they suddenly all turn to nationalism. In Europe, it's shocking because we've had peace. In Europe, we've had peace for 70 years. And we've, in our whole history, we have never had peace for 70 years, you know. It's actually fantastic. But now, all these nationalist movements spring up. And the reason is that they were those people who see no chance for themselves in globalization. Who see there are no jobs for me, there's no money for me, I stay as poor as I am. Nobody's interested in my opinion. These people become nationalists. And that's of course dangerous. You know, it's very dangerous because in European history we have seen nationalism leads to war. You know.
So yeah, do you think the economic factor plays a role in the rise of religions and nationalism again?
Yes, I think one has to be very realistic. Democracy, freedom of speech, a high degree of individualism is something you have to have a minimal amount of money from. And if the general level of economic wealth and education is low, then these biological structures come out again, you know, religions, Taliban, warlords. It's from evolution, it's from biological evolution. It's actually how animals organize themselves, and everything falls down into groups and leaders for fighting against each other again. That is why, I mean, some economic stability is really necessary to even to be able to establish political institutions. And it's hard because the situation on the world is not easy. We are 7.3 billion people now. We will be, I just read a figure this morning, we will be 31% more people by 2060 on the planet, something like 10, 11 billion. And Buddhists will be 7% lower, and Muslims will be 70% up. So in 2060, the world is going to be Muslim. The Muslim religion is the religion that's going to grow most. And because it has many young people. You know, Germany is a very old country. Japan is a very old country. But in the Muslim world, there are very many young people, you know, and the problem is that they want to do something with their lives, but they have difficult economical conditions. And the question is, on a planet like this with 10 billion people, how can one give good economic conditions to everybody? It's getting full, you know. It's very hard, but I fully agree.
Yeah, sorry.
A stable economy. I'm a philosopher, and I've heard once say another philosopher, there are only two kinds of people on the earth. A first group is people who do not have enough to eat to do philosophy. And the second group of people is who have too much to eat to do philosophy. And it's, you know, that describes the problem.
Actually, recently Egypt decided to have an approval to give birth to a child because they hit 100 million recently. And they have many economic problems. So they decided, the government decided that a family should apply to get an approval to have a child and then to have another child 5 years later. Actually, I support such things, but the people with their religious background don't accept such things. I once read an Irish novel discussing the problem with the Catholic Church there and how they were giving birth to many children, but then they accepted and now they they sell condoms and contraceptive pills in the pharmacies and even on counter. So
yes, but you see, they have not done this for 50 years. That's a good example. Yeah. The Catholic Church has gone to the poor people in Africa for decades and told them not to use condoms. And the greatest population explosion is going to be in Africa in this century. And they all come, I mean, you see it, they drown in the Mediterranean. They all come to Libya, and this is just the beginning. There will be many, many more. And many people don't see the connection that it was Christians, the Christian churches who went there and said, don't use condoms. And that is one example where actually, I want to be very neutral here, religion can create a lot of suffering in the world. And religion should not be something that creates suffering in the world. The Chinese, I mean, China are doing birth control too. If I may, I will tell you one very interesting thing I read a number of years ago. There was an institute in Germany who did just genocide research. So they looked at all genocides in the history of humanity and analyzed them. And looked what is common to them. And there's a very simple thing that is common. If there are a lot of young men between 17 and 30 who have very high testosterone level, who are strong and aggressive, and they cannot found a family and have children because the economic situation is so bad that they can't marry, then two things happen. Either they attack the neighbors, or civil war starts in the country itself. So I think that is a very common problem in the Arabic world, that there are many wonderful young men who do not really see a chance to found a family in a situation. And of course it's problematic if you come and say, yeah, well, it's okay, you should not have children. There are too many children. What are they going to say, you know?
It's stated that Syria, for example, has a large young population, and we can see the ongoing war in Syria since 2011.
Exactly. In the past, we have said, this is ideologies, this is religion, this is nationalism. But it is also biological principles. You know, if a lot of new young men come and they cannot go have children, then they attack the neighbors. It is something that has been here for millions of years on this planet. Not only human beings do that. You know, a lot of other living creatures do that, and it's difficult. We have to control ourselves.
Actually, I have attended a conference on higher education for refugees in Istanbul, and there was a Syrian refugee who told us about giving birth to 4 children while living in a refugee camp. That was so surprising for us. But this is the problem in the Middle East, because people don't think that bringing more children means a burden on their family. They look at them as a way to support their families.
It is a very simple economical reason, because if there is no pension system, that you have some money and health insurance when you're old, you need children. They are your insurance. And I noticed this when I was in very poor countries. I've been traveling a lot when I was younger, for instance, in Sumatra or so. I mean, if you talk to farmers in the jungle in Sumatra, they immediately want to marry their daughter to me. There's no peace, you know, you cannot stay alone. And if they have managed to get one child out, And if that child only puts $20 in an envelope and mails it back, one of their 5 children,
it will be well for them.
then they are safe when they are old. So I think the reason why Germans and Japanese don't have children anymore, we have very few children, is simply because there's so much health insurance and people suddenly see, oh, I'll be okay when I'm old. I will not need children when I'm old in the rich countries. So that reason drops off. An interesting thing is also that in the more secular parts of the world, people stop marrying. You know, if women have a chance to make their own money and pay for their own food and living, suddenly they stop marrying. You know, and it's economic factors.
Yeah. In many of your lectures and essays, you have discussed the so-called secular spirituality. What do you mean by this?
Well, it would be very good. I have this free essay, Spirituality and Intellectual Honesty, if that could be available in the Arabic world, because I think that is what we actually have to think about. I'm not saying I have the solution, but that is what we have to think about, and not only in the Middle East, we have to think about it in the West as well. So the question is, can there be a kind of spirituality that has nothing to do with churches, imams, priests, popes, authorities, that is not organized, but still has depth? So in Western philosophy, you mentioned Nietzsche, I mean, there has been enlightenment and a lot of criticism of religion, but that is only half of the story. So we see that organized classical religion doesn't work. It's irrational. It creates wars. It creates suffering in the world. That's not the solution. But we also see, of course, that pure maximization of profit and capitalism and hedonism in the Western world don't work at all. You know, this doesn't work too. We know that. So the question is if there can be something in between, something that has not to do with believing in something or having faith, but with direct experience. So I'm a long-term practitioner of meditation. I meditate every morning and every evening for more than 40 years. I do a lot of science and philosophy. I'm a very radical person. I'm very critical of the church. But I do this every morning and evening. But I have no temple and no guru and no master. I do this all by myself. And it's also not something one can talk about, because it has something to do with silence and with things one cannot talk about. But the interesting question, of course, would be in the West. There is now a lot of mindfulness. We have just also made, you find an English film on my website for free that shows how in Western schools in Europe, we are beginning to integrate mindfulness meditation in schools, but without Buddhism, no Buddhism. Just the practice and teach it to children. So on the website you can find that. And the question is, if there is a way that you can have science and the whole rational evidence approach to life, but still have a depth and, you know, a sensitivity and something that has nothing to do with believing in something crazy or doing some ritual or so. We have to think about this together. I'm not saying I have the solution, but in this essay, I've tried to describe this in a non-technical way. So, for instance, when I was young, I've traveled a lot to countries like India and Asia and tested this out. I've always wanted to go the route, you know, overland from Germany to India. But as you know, the Americans have destroyed my dream. I will never be able to do this in my life anymore. You know, the Americans have taken many parts of the world where I cannot go anymore, where I wanted to go. So
how do you do that?
An interesting question would be for me, I don't know much about Sufism. I've read a bit about Sufism, but could there be a secular Sufism? Because in the West, there are very many interesting people now who speak about secular Buddhism and a secular spiritual practice that comes out of Buddhism. But the question would be, could there be a secular Arabic tradition of spirituality that maybe comes out of Sufism and has nothing to do with organized religion?
Although I'm not that good into the Arabic culture, but as I concentrate more on the ancient Mesopotamian heritage, but there is someone called Al-Hallaj. He's a Sufi poet who has something that equals the so-called secular spirituality. I think he can be highlighted to promote such approach in the Middle East based on things inspired from their own tradition. He was even crucified on the river of the Tigris in the Abbasid era.
I mean, in the end, liberation means liberation from tradition also. But in the beginning, maybe one has to take techniques that are close to oneself. But then again, I don't want to be crucified.
Yeah, for sure. So do you think this, I mean, secular spirituality would have a chance in the future of humanity?
I'm very sorry I have to say this. I think it's the thing we really have to think about it, but I'm actually quite pessimist. I don't want to take the hope away from people, but if I don't think about the Middle East or Germany, but if I think of mankind as a whole, I think things look really problematic in a number of ways. One problem is climate change. I think the biggest problem mankind has is climate change. And it doesn't react to discussions and talks. It's physics in the atmosphere, and it just goes on. And maybe, I think it is almost too late right now because it's so far progressed. So I think climate change is a really big problem. We have talked about population growth, but another problem is that the rich are always getting richer and the poor are always getting poorer. And nobody knows to stop the financial industry. You know, the financial industry in Wall Street, London, but also maybe some Saudis have become so strong that no single government, the German government or Putin or Trump, I mean, in America, they have the government, right? They are in the government. Trump is the religious right and the financial industry in the government. But it is very difficult for individual governments to still stop the financial industry. And that leads to an accumulation process. In 2 hours, I will have to go away and give another talk in another city on artificial intelligence and virtual reality. And I'm asked about this a lot. And I think there are also big risks with artificial intelligence coming. One is that it may take many jobs in the poor countries. But another problem is, of course, if the people that get artificial intelligence and make the money with it, if they are only people, say, in Europe, in America, and China, that all the other countries on the world are historically decoupled. That's a big risk because artificial intelligence will not be everywhere. It will be just in the rich countries for the rich people in the next 50 years. And one problem is that not only it makes the rich richer and the poor poorer, but it also creates a distance between the rich countries and the poor countries in the world. And I think that's also a great danger. So maybe it's just me, but I'm a bit pessimistic, but it doesn't matter. I am all for a principle, I call it the principle of self-respect. You just do what is right, even if you have no chance. In a traditional way, to put it in a religious way, to save your own soul, you know, to stay mentally healthy, you have to think and do about those things that you think are right, like secular spirituality, even if the world doesn't care and if big problems occur. There's no other way. One just has to do what oneself thinks is the right thing in a very honest way, so that one can keep one's self-respect. Because I don't know about young people in the Arabic world. I talk to some in Istanbul and Cairo, but not often. In Germany, it's very difficult for young people to keep their self-respect because they see there's a crazy world out there with a lot of problems, and they don't really have a chance to do something. They would want to do something, but they see how complicated it is. And for many of them, it's a big psychological problem.
So do you think it would eventually leave us unemployed?
Well, we don't know. It's a new thing. Just last week, I was in the European Parliament discussing this with Steven Pinker and 4 other people. If you want to, I can send you the video link. It's a 2.5-hour discussion. And there are many different risks. For unemployment, it doesn't need very complicated artificial intelligence. It needs rather simple things like robots. For instance, in China, you have thousands of people who were welders and who were welding ships. And now robots do this 24 hours a day. And these people have learned nothing else, and now they have no job anymore. Or in America, when you will have automated trucks that drive over the whole continent, then the truck drivers will have no job anymore. That is something simple, you know, this is just robotic automatization. It doesn't need a lot of artificial intelligence. And the mantra of the conservative neoliberal elite has always been, well, if you destroy some jobs, you get new jobs through the new technology. But I'm not so sure, because the new jobs that come through computers and artificial intelligence will be creative jobs for very highly educated people. They will get a lot of chances maybe with new jobs, but the question is for poor, uneducated people who do simple bodily work, if there will be new jobs for them. That's, I think, is a great question, but nobody really...
Do you think in a world of unemployment, philosophy will be affected?
Oh yeah, we've had that in German history. If there's unemployment, suddenly people say, why do we need thinkers for? Why do we have to pay taxes for philosophers? Away with them, you know, they get too much money. We have it in America now that a majority of the Republicans thinks that universities are not good for America, all in all. You know, so if there's mass unemployment, German history has shown this, but other histories have shown it too, there is a risk of anti-intellectualism, that people suddenly say, we don't need these complicated books and theories and science anymore. I want a simple story, a religious worldview, and I want one strong leader. I don't want people who discuss, but one strong leader. And if that one strong leader says, I'll give you jobs, like Adolf Hitler said, did, you know, said, I let you build the highways and gave jobs to everybody, then you have a big, big problem, you know. So
we're going back.
Yeah.
We're going backwards.
So the answer to this is, we know the answer to it is there. It's negative income tax, you know, or a free basic income for everybody. If the productivity increases, it has to be distributed in a just way. I mean, the philosophical solution to the problem is on the table, but at least I don't know what you will do. But in the West, it's clear we have never done this. If there's a gain in productivity, the poor get 10% of the gain and the rich get 90% of the gain. We don't distribute it evenly. So the simple answer is, if we make a lot of progress with artificial intelligence, we have to distribute the gain in productivity to everybody.
Okay, I see. So what are the future achievements of, or the outcomes of Singer and the Mind group you established?
Oh, the thing is, the Mind group almost doesn't exist anymore because I got a very nice 5-year fellowship. So for 5 years, I'm not teaching now, I'm just doing research. And so all the young people went everywhere else in the world and disappeared. Many of them have become professors now, but it was an interesting experience. Maybe you have seen the Open Mind website that we created, and that was, yeah, maybe you can point your readers to this. That was a project where I used a lot of money I could get and try to make a donation to the poor students in the poor countries in China, India, and South America, so that we produce really good philosophy, peer-reviewed 4 times, but give it away for free to everybody. That was the idea, you know, do something good here and give it away. And now the interesting experience is the Chinese students do not take it. The present is there on the table. Indian students do not download it. So I don't know what the reason for this is, but rich people from the rich countries in America and Europe have done it. They've made it free. And now it's almost only rich people from the rich countries that use that electronic resource. South America is a little different. In South America, more and more are downloading it and using it. I think China is maybe blocking it in the internet. Maybe that's the reason. And nobody knows why Indian students don't download it. Also, really.
So you are communicating
with the Open Mind website, right? That is a free information source. If young people in the Arabic world want to know what is the really interesting stuff in modern philosophy of mind and neuroscience, I can promise you on that website, it's 1,800 pages to read, right? You find a very good selection of the best work, and it's all for free.
Great. Okay. So to end this interesting interview, what is your last message to the young people in the country, in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa?
I think you have to establish a new secular culture that is based, you have to cultivate public debates that are based on rational argument and on evidence. So you have to install a new public space where people can discuss with each other without hate and without attacking each other, just with rational arguments and scientific evidence. But as you do this, you must not forget your own inner development. And it is not only a question of science and rationality, it is also a question of what I call consciousness culture. We have to cultivate and develop our own minds, and thinking is just one small way of doing this. There are some deeper, better ways, like meditating.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for this interview. It was our honor and pleasure.
You're quite welcome. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Wish you all the best and goodbye.
Goodbye.